Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. India and Canada, both democracies, both parliamentary forms of government, both members of the Commonwealth, have different reactions both internally and externally to identical issues. There were farmers' protests in India which lasted more than a year, and there were protests with the truckers and the Freedom Convoy in Canada, which lasted hardly a couple of weeks rather. But it's quite interesting to contrast the way these two protests, which involved road blockages, were handled by the respective governments, and how the foreign governments intervened and condemned or supported the domestic governments. The Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, waded into the farmers' agitation, advising India and the Prime Minister of India how in a democracy there is a need to talk to agitators and resolve issues, despite knowing the fact that there was a series of round of talks with the farmers, futile, useless. And his purpose of giving this unwanted advice was because his national Canadian government depends on Sikh parliamentarian group that were anti-India in their conduct. And the same Prime Minister who said we must talk, Trudeau, imposed national emergency in Canada. In India, the government of India tolerated these blockages for more than a year, did not take any repressive measure, did not arrest anybody, did not take any step. The government of Canada in a couple of years declared emergency, ordered the police, baton charge, sent the mounted police, arrested people, and there was even a talk of involving the military in it. That was the difference in approach, the difference in reaction of India and of Canada as far as the internal management is concerned. Now come to the foreign one. The Prime Minister of Canada took the action imposing emergency on prodding of the USA. So it was a foreign intervention which provoked him, or rather persuaded him. He had dictatorial tendencies, and he has them, and he doesn't hide it. I must compliment Trudeau for his honesty and transparency. He has always said that he likes people like Castro and President Xi and Che Guevara. So those tendencies were fed with fuel by the US officials and the political leadership who wanted strong action against the protesters. And the same people, through their mouthpiece Trudeau, were condemning. And there were parliamentarians in England and other parts of the world who were condemning India. But have you seen a single condemnation of Canada government in dealing with the protest that they have done? And they condemned India, they promoted India, they persuaded India to be reasonable and talk, which India was doing. And here the emergency was declared, and not a word of protest or advice or suggestion. Is it evidence of racism? Or is it that the whites still have The feeling of bearing the white man's burden, what it is. And not only the parliamentarians of the different parts of the world and the Prime Minister of Canada, there were other showbiz personalities like Rihanna, including Indians living abroad like Priyanka Chopra, and that girl, Greta, who started tweeting about the unjustness of all and how the impervious central government of India should take back the three agricultural laws and give respite to the poor farmers from piping coal in which they were living in the tents. They forgot that those tents were heated. They were enjoying all the facilities of life they were not enjoying at home. But did Rihanna or Priyanka or Greta say anything, a single word, to Justin Trudeau? So on the one side, the government, the legislature, the governments condemned India for being purely democratic. And all those are mum at the dictatorial action taken by Trudeau. It's the same, like Pakistan would object to the treatment of Muslims in India, but would be absolutely quiet and poised and cool about the treatment of Uyghurs in China. This is hypocrisy. And then, you might be thinking that what I'm saying is there's a comment that I say that it is white man's burden. Is if Priyanka Chopra condemned it. Let me tell you, there are whites who are whites, and there are whites who are gentle. Anyway said, she was a white, but she was honest. Now, people like Priyanka Chopra have a same problem, that is being the footlickers. They think that by condemning India, they can be counted as progressives. Little knowing that people deride them. Now, the people who condemned India were the people who never knew what the laws were. And they were commenting freely. And we have seen the parliamentarians, we have seen the governments, we have seen the public figures. Look at the media. Media was having a great time showing the dictatorial nature of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Social activists, think tanks, Twitter experts, all had a gala time punching away freely at the government of India. No effort was made by the government of India to break the agitation or declare an emergency of any sort. And finally, they withdrew. Come to the truckers' education. The protest template is similar. Block the vehicles' entry points. The purpose of the agitation might be different, but the method was the same. This was an agitation against the perceived forcing of vaccination of the Canadian truck drivers. And they have definitely followed the trend set by the Indian farmers. But here, the pot calling the kettle black, Trudeau, said immediately, and look at that, while Modi and his government were doing their jobs in a normal way, here the Prime Minister immediately shifts his residence to an unknown place because of the security reason. Certainly the rule of law and need to follow the same becomes very crucial in Canada. The rule of law applicable only in Canada, not in India. In Canada there was an executive action, not a legislative action, and it's a parliamentary democracy that was being taken. In India, the legislation, the parliament had approved the three agricultural laws. And yet, Government of India was wrong. This was exactly the situation which Mark Antony talks about in Julius Caesar. that they offered the crown to Julius Caesar 3 times, they refused. And yet they say that he was ambitious. Here is a Prime Minister who did not take any coercive action, did not declare emergency, did not order the police to get in charge or send the mounted police, and yet he is a dictator. 2 weeks, and Canada government could not face the protests. And all those media, political thinkers, think tanks, they are mum. Now come to the other part. The other part is that in the biting minus cold, the petrol and the gas of the truckers is being forcibly taken away. There was no coercive action in India. Then the banks have been told to stop the money transfers. In India, the money transfers took place and all the money was being funneled in from different channels, from Canada, from USA, from England to India. Even those organizations which have been banned were financing it. But the government did not ask the banks to freeze those accounts, which was done by Canadian government. The Indian government clearly had mentioned that the Khalistani support for agitation was there with funding, including the shameful behavior of the agitators on the Republic Day. But the Western media, the Twitter users, the so-called progressive legislators hounded India for political reasons. Evidently, sauce for the goose is not sauce for the gander, and the great experts are uniformly quiet on Canada's tough response. Democracy was in danger in India. Democracy is not in danger in Canada, despite the authoritarian, dictatorial attitude. Now, the greater enemy is never outside. That's one thing which emerges out of this diametrically opposed reaction to the two protests. The enemy is always within. What does one say about the media and the political personalities who are blowing up the Western attack on handling of the farmers' agitation? But the government silent and rudderless on the tough response to the Canadian government. As a matter of fact, this was the time for Modi to condemn Trudeau and tell him, hey, Justin, why don't you take use the advice that you gave me? But then they showed grace and they said, well, we will not demean ourselves. Hasn't it dawned on anybody that Canada as a democracy has declined? Have social divisions not emerged in Canada now as a result of that? And question arises, why this pathetic silence from those people, what I'll call it, India Know Everything Brigade. They don't know anything about India and they pose that they are India experts. The reality is that the Indian government managed the farmers' agitation much more successfully than the Trudeau government in Canada. However, there is a slightest word of comparison between those who are looking to blow up the Western criticism of Indian democracy. The Delhi government, the Kejriwal government, openly supports the Indian farmers' agitation. Here, none of the premiers, even of opposition, supported the agitation. Opposition leaders were wanting media coverage by going to the blockade sites. Here, no leader of the Conservatives, NDP, or Green Party in any way went to the blockade sites. Funding of the doubtful character was coming to facilitate the agitation. However, emergency powers were never used. People, the politicians, rushed to the Supreme Court of India for direct judicial directions Here, not a single politician has rushed to Canadian Supreme Court asking for the court directions. Today, discussions have taken a different turn. While discussing Indian democracy, it's imperative that the so-called intelligent and wise men see the difference in handling the similar agitation by Canada and by India. You have got to admit, you have got to recognize that India has managed this problem much better than Canada has. That the response of the Indian government was much more human, much more democratic, much more balanced than that of the Indian government. I am no apologist or spokesman for the Indian government, but the reality has got to be accepted. And I would say compliment the opposition leaders in India, in Canada, who have not tried to build up their own agenda by creating a situation that can be problematic for the country. Even when the emergency has been declared, they did not rush to the court. Only yesterday, I think, Alberta has decided to seek the court direction, but that after it has been done, so that such an action is not taken in future. It's more of a preventive thing. So, I feel that this difference in approach, this criticism of India was a biased one, was a manufactured one, was to show that the blacks and the browns are still not human enough and capable enough. Use them, yes. Utilize their capabilities, yes. But do not think them to be your equals. You can be condescending, you can be patronizing, you can talk all the bullshit, but essentially treat them like dregs as if still they are your colonies, which they are not. It's time to wake up. People don't think like that, but politicians do. So it's the time for the politicians, the paid media, the incapable experts in the foreign countries to wake up and realize the reality. Thank you.